Okay, so today's is solving rational equations. And so for solving rational equations, it's going to be, again, like I said, it's going to be similar to the adding and subtracting rationals from yesterday, except we're going to finish it off by solving the equation. So there's 4-step process basically. We only need to really do the 3 steps of the process. The first step is to find a common denominator, kind of like we did yesterday when we're adding and subtracting. We got to find the least common denominator. Then we want to simplify the sides, and we're going to solve for x. Okay, so that's the process. Find the least common denominator, simplify, solve for x. All right. So if we look, let's take a look at this one. So we have, and I'm going to do it a little bit differently for number 1. The example number 1, we have y plus 5 plus y plus 2 equals 7 over 1 is how we're going to write it. Okay? So we have the numbers 5, 2, and 1. And we want to simplify those. So we want to take the numbers 5, 2, and 1, and the first thing we want to do is be able to find the least common denominator. Okay? So let me zoom in on this so you can see my work as we do it. So you have y over 2, or y over 5, y over 2, and 7 over 1. Because if you have a whole number, it's just over 1. So what's the least common denominator between 5, 2, and 1? What will they all go to? 10, right? They'll all go to 10. All right. So we want 10 as the bottom of our fraction. Okay, so what do you need to multiply the first fraction by to get to 10? You had it at 5, right? So what does it need to be multiplied by to get to 10? 2. So that instead of y, it'll be 2y. You need to multiply this fraction by 5, right, to get to 10. So that'll be 5y. You need to multiply this fraction by 10, because it only has a 1 on the bottom. You need to multiply by 10, so that will be 70. Okay? So now what you've done is you did the least common denominator. So that means you got all of your denominators, all of the bottom of your fractions, you got them equal to 10. Once you have all the denominators the same, meaning that they're all 10, then you can actually cancel them out, okay? So they can go away. So 2y plus 5y equals 70 is our problem. So we get 7y equals 70, and we divide by 7. So y equals 10, and that's our final answer for example number 1. Okay? So that is our final answer. Problem number in the you try, we want to set all those to our least common denominator. So our least common denominator is going to be 12. So we want to multiply each of those until we get to 12. Well, the first one's great. 3x minus 2 is already at 12. The second one, we would have to multiply by 2 to get to 12. And the third one, we would have to multiply by 2 to get to 12. So now we have all 3 denominators at 12, so we can solve the problem. So it's going to be 3x minus 2, and then minus 2 equals 2. So what's 3x minus 2 minus 2? 3x minus 4 equals 2. So then we got to add 4 to the right side. So we get 3x equals 6. And then when we divide by 3, we get x equals 2. So these seem, like so far, they seem pretty good. All you're trying to do is find that least common denominator. Once you found that least common denominator, you're able to forget the bottom of the fraction and just solve it like a regular equation. Okay, so that's all of example number 1. Now we're going to move to example 2. In example 2 now, we have some x's as well on there. So we're going to look at what happens when you have x in the problem. So we're looking at the least common denominator. So if you notice, we have an x squared and an x. We have to take the x squared, and we also have a 3. So 3x squared is going to be our least common denominator. You have to take the highest exponent you have, and then you have to take the number as well. So we have 3x squared as our least common denominator. 3x squared. Now, in the first fraction, we're saying, what do we need to multiply to get to 3x squared? So we're at 3x, and we want to get to 3x squared. So what do we need to multiply by to get from 3x to 3x squared? X, right? So we need another x. So we're going to multiply by x. So that will give me 11x. Here we only have 3, but we need to get to 3x squared. So we got to multiply by x squared. Well, 1 times x squared is just 1x squared. So we just write x squared. And then over here, we've got x squared. We need to get to 3x squared, so we got to multiply by 3. So that would be negative 12. And then we get to cancel out the bottom. Now, the tough part about this one is that it is all, that there's an x squared. So we are going to say 11x minus x squared equals negative 12. Anytime we have an x and an x squared, we are not able to just solve it for x. We're going to have to factor it. So we got to move everything to one side. So we're going to move everything over here because it's a negative x squared. I want it to be a positive. So I'm going to move everything to the right, make it equal 0. So I'm going to add x squared over here. I'm going to subtract 11x, and then I've got minus 12. Now, what two numbers multiply to give me negative 12 and add to give me negative 11? It's easier than you think, right? What two numbers multiply to give you negative 12 and add to give you negative 11? Yeah, a negative 12 and a positive 1, right? So x minus 12 and x plus 1. Now, both of those are equal to 0. So we factored it. It wasn't hard to factor. Two numbers that multiply give you negative 12, add give you negative 11. Now, once we factored it, x minus 12 equals 0. So that means x equals 12. And x plus 1 equals 0. So that means x equals negative 1. So I've got my two answers. So that one was a little bit harder because when I canceled out the denominator, then I had to factor. So that's what made it a little bit trickier than the first time. Because when I canceled out my denominator, then I had to factor because of having the x squared. So that made it just a little bit more than what I had to do the first time. All right. So now let's look at the U try over here. How it doesn't look like we're going to get to an x squared. So we have 4 and 2. Both 4 and 2 will go to 4. And then we have an x squared. So 4x squared is going to be our common denominator. So the first one has 4x. So it's just missing an x to get to 4x squared. So 7x. The second one already has an x squared. It's just missing a 4. So we multiply by 4, we get 12. The third one has 2x squared. We need to get to 4x squared, so we multiply by 2. Okay. Now we're able to cancel out all the denominators on the bottom. So we get 7x minus 12 equals 2. These are the ones we like, okay, because it doesn't have an x squared in it, so we're good. So we can solve for x. We just got to add 12 to the right side. And we get 7x equals 14. And when we divide by 7, what do we get? Yep, x equals 2. And that would be our final answer for example number 2. So we're good there. Now we're going to get to a little bit more. That was example 2. Now we're going to go down to example 3. We're going to have a little bit more to do in example 3. All right? So I'll stop. In example 3, this is 3 over 1. So we have x plus 2 and x minus 3. That's going to be our common denominators. So for each one, it needs x plus 2 and x minus 3. Now, it's going to be easy for 2 of them probably, but not for the other one. So for this first fraction, you just need to multiply by x minus 3. So we're going to do 4 times x minus 3. That's 4x minus 12. For this last fraction, it just needs x plus 2. So we're going to multiply 3x times x, that's 3x squared, and 3x times 2 is 6x. So those two weren't too bad. You just had to multiply by what it was missing. Now that middle fraction, that 3, it's missing everything. So it needs x plus 2 and x minus 3. So to do x plus 2 and x minus 3, we actually need to do the box method. So x, 2, x, negative 3. X times x is x squared. 2 times x is 2x. X times negative 3 is negative 3x, and 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So we do the box method to multiply those two together, right? Because it didn't have any of those. So I had to use the box method. And now, once we've multiplied those two together, that's x squared minus x minus 6, right? Because 2x and negative 3x give you negative 1x. So you got x squared minus x minus 6. All of that gets multiplied by the 3 that was already up there. The 3 goes into all of that. So 3 times all of that. So 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times negative x is negative 3x. 3 times negative 6 is negative 18. Like we had to do a lot there to get that one. Okay? So now we're finally able to cancel out the bottom. Now, something good is going to happen in this one, so that's a good thing. Okay? So if you notice, you have a 3x squared over here and a 3x squared over here. If you move the 3x squared over, they're actually going to cancel out. If you subtract 3x squared to the right side, you get 3x squared minus 3x squared. So it goes away. So that's good. Okay? But let's simplify what we can first. 4x plus negative 3x gives us 1x. Okay? Negative 12 and negative 18 gives us negative 30. The 3x squares are going to go away. So that's good. And that equals 6x. So now we just got to move the x over. Subtract x. So we get 5x equals negative 30, and then we divide by 5. So x equals what? Negative 6. Yep. That looked like a long problem, but it helped us out there when we divided the x squares. Okay? So the reason we had to do the box method was because the 3 did not have anything in the denominator, and it needed the x plus 2 and the x minus 3. So in the you try, and I'm going to let you try here in just a second, it's the same thing. Okay? So the common denominator is going to be x minus 4 and x minus 3. So in this fraction, it already has the x minus 4, so you got to multiply it by x minus 3. In this one, it already has the x minus 3, so you got to multiply by x minus 4. The 2, though, doesn't have either. So we've got to do the box method, x, negative 4, x, negative 3, to see what we get to multiply by 2. Okay? So I'm going to give you a minute to try and see if you could set that one up in order and see if we could get ready to solve that one. What I set up, we did the box method. X times x is x squared. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. And negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. So negative 4x and negative 3x give us negative 7x. So we got x squared minus 7x plus 12 when we multiplied those things. Now, we had a 2 on top, so we got to multiply that answer by 2. So x squared times 2 is 2x squared. Negative 7x times 2 is negative 14x. And 12 times 2 is 24. The 2x squares, when I move them over, the 2x squares will cancel out, which is great. Okay? So now we're going to simplify the left side. So 5x plus negative 14x is negative 9x. And negative 15 plus 24 is a positive 9. And that equals negative 8x. And then even better, when we move the 9x over, so when we add 9x over here, negative 8x plus 9x is just 1x. And that equals 9. And that's our final answer. So we get x equals 9. And we're done. So we were able to just kind of, to go through again, we had to do the FOIL method. That was the important part, the box method. We had to multiply it by 2 because it was a 2 on top there. The other ones we just had to distribute because they were only missing one thing instead of 2 things. Okay? So that was the whole process, and then we ended up getting an easy answer. The x squares canceled out because if you move the 2x squared over, it'd be 2x squared minus 2x squared, which is just 0. So they were able to cancel out, so we were left with just the x's and trying to solve for that. All right. So that is, and we got x equals 9. So that was example 3. So we're going to move down to the last example. Example number 4, the common denominator, very easy to find, is x minus 2. So x minus 2, that one's already good. We don't have an x minus 2 here. And the x minus 2 here is good. Now, the only difficult thing maybe to do is how do we multiply? Well, we have to multiply x minus 2. We're going to multiply it to the negative 7, okay? So basically what we're doing here, we got 7 times x and 7 times negative 2. We get 7x and negative 14 is what we get in here. 7 times x is 7x. 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. The tricky part is when we cross this out, we get x minus 7x. That is negative 6x. But here is where people sometimes get confused. This is a minus negative 14. What if you have a negative 14? That's a positive 14. Right? So that's where you could get a little confused, right? Because it's minus negative 14. That's a positive 14. And then you are going to solve it. So you're going to subtract 14. So you get negative 6x equals negative 12. And then divide by negative 6. So x equals 2. And that is the complete example number 4. So this last one that I'm going to let you try, you only have to, you're doing the same thing. You have to multiply the 4 by x minus 4. What it's missing. Multiply that 4 by x minus 4, and then cancel out the bottom and solve for x. And that will be our final answer. In this problem, if you multiply the 4 by x minus 4, you get 4x minus 16. So we have x minus 3 over here. And we have 4x minus 16 plus 1. So that's 4x minus 15. So we're going to move our x's to one side and our numbers to one side. So I'm going to subtract x, and I'll get 3x I'm going to add 15, and I'll get 12. If you moved them to the other side, it would still give you the same thing. And now I'm going to divide by 3. So my final answer is x equals 4. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4, so x equals 4. And that is all 4 examples completed and worked out for solving equations. So now we're going to just look at what our sheet will be for the classwork, and then we'll be able to go from there. Worksheet in numbers 1 and 2, they already have the same denominator, so you can cross the denominators out and just solve them. In number 3, your least common denominator will be 7x. So make sure you write that. In number 3, your least common denominator is 7x. In number 4, your least common denominator would be 6x. So you would have 6x as your least common denominator. In number 5, you want to make sure your least common denominator to get each fraction is 7 times x minus 3. So 7, and then also x minus 3 in number 5. And then in number 6, you want all of them to have 5 and x plus 6. So that's your least common denominator, 5 and x plus 6. So remember, you're multiplying the fraction by what it doesn't have. And then once you got all of them with the same denominator, you can cancel out the denominators and just solve for x. And this shouldn't take you very long. It'll be a good, quick worksheet to finish. Submit the notes today, submit the worksheet today, and then go back if there's anything you're missing and make sure you get caught up on that, and that'll finish up the week, okay?